2010. We are at the workplace of Bob and Nancy Anderson on Route 9 in Marlboro. Today's production crew is on video camera, Abby Rollett, on audio recorder, Jackson Morgan, on still camera, Carl White. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so I'd like to ask each of you separate questions about your background. Then I have some background questions for you both. After that, I'll ask each of you questions about your work lives in Marlboro. Okay, so Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Have you always lived in Marlboro, or did you move here from somewhere else?
I moved here from Annapolis, Maryland.
When did you move to Marlboro?
That was in 1981.
Where else have you lived before here?
Well, besides Annapolis, I lived in Washington, D.C., and before that, I grew up in Massachusetts.
What are some of the reasons why you moved here?
I moved here because I thought it would be a nice community to live in and to raise a family. My daughter was not quite 2 years old, and I was also ready for a change in career. So, and I really liked the countryside, and just the feeling that you recognized people when you went somewhere in town, or that other people recognized you and knew who you were. Because the place where we lived before was very crowded and heavily populated, and you never saw anyone that you knew when you went shopping or just did any ordinary daily activity. And so that was the motivation for moving here, and it turned out that that's just what we found, was that it was a real community where people knew each other and cared about what was going on.
So you've lived in town 29 years?
Yeah, just about. Mm-hmm.
What are your parents' names and what were their careers?
My father was Bob McGinnis, and he was a pharmacist. And my mother, Florence, was did a variety of things, but then managed a store and then worked with my father in his pharmacy.
Where did you live as a child?
In Milford, Massachusetts. It's a town about the size of Brattleboro.
How would you describe yourself when you were a child?
Quiet and studious. I liked tennis and swimming.
What high school did you go to?
Milford High School, which was just lived a block away from where I grew up, so I could walk to school.
What did you do between high school and college?
I just worked summer jobs. I did a variety of things as summer jobs and saving money for college.
Where did you go to college?
In Emmanuel College, that's in Boston, Massachusetts.
Did you go into graduate school?
No, I didn't. Although I took courses at night school after college, studying accounting.
May I ask how old you are now?
I'm 65. Almost 66.
Mr. Anderson?
No, I lived here two different periods. I lived here as a youngster. I went to Marlboro School for a while, and then after high school, I left and I joined the Marine Corps and for a few years, and then I moved and lived in several different areas, and then I moved back here at the same time my wife did in 1981.
Where else? Where else have you lived before here?
Well, I've lived in California. I lived in Annapolis. That's where I met Nancy. I lived in Washington, D.C., and I lived in North Carolina.
What are some of the reasons why you moved here?
Well, I think it's a great little town. I remember growing up here as a youngster, and just I like the outdoors. And so when my daughter was born, I thought, boy, it wouldn't be a bad place for her to grow up as well. And my parents were still here at the time, and so we moved back, and it's worked. That was 29 years ago, so I guess it worked out.
What are your parents' names and what were their careers?
Well, they passed away, but it was Charles and Isabel Hartenbach were their names.
Where did you live as a child?
I lived not very far from here. There's a little lake called Hidden Lake over there, and where the Rikers live now, and that's where I grew up.
How would you describe yourself when you were a child?
Well, I liked the outdoors. I had a horse as a youngster, which I liked that very much. And there was a little farm here, right in the center of town back then. We had 10 cows, but I worked for him during the summer. I liked that very well. For a while I was going to be a farmer, but that didn't work out, so which is probably just as well, because you have to work pretty hard as a farmer.
In what years did you attend the Marlboro Elementary School?
I was there, I went there, I came in the 5th grade, and I graduated from the elementary school in 1957.
What are a few ways in which the school is different today than it was when you were a student there?
Well, it's bigger, and I guess I spent most of my time in what's now, I think, the junior high room, which is on the right as you go in the door there, right? And that was there, except it was only about half the size when I was there. And when I was there, we had about 35 students, and we had 4 students in one classroom, 4 grades in one classroom. So you had 1 through 4 in one room. It was 2 rooms. You had grades 1 through 4 in one room, and then grades 5 through 8 in the other room, and only 1 teacher in each room. So at times it was a little chaotic.
What were your teachers' names?
My teacher's name was Mrs. Whitney, and the grades 1 through 4 was Mrs. Eames. And she lived right next door to the school. In fact, they donated the property to the school that the school was built on, because it was built in 1953, I think, or 52. And the White House that's right just down the road on Route 9 was where Mrs. Eames lived.
Cool. What high school did you go to?
I went to Brattleboro High School. It was...
What did you do between high school and college?
Oh, I had a summer job. I worked for the town highway department right here in Marlboro, and then I went to college in Colorado. But the first time around didn't work very well. I didn't study hard enough, so I left before they threw me out. And that's when I would join the Marine Corps.
May I ask how old you are now?
Sure, I'm 66.
Cool. Now to both of you guys, what is the name of your daughter?
Sarah.
What are the names of her teachers during her time there?
Oh,
Good question.
well, Mr. Morse was the primary teacher, and then Mrs. Nero, and she had David Holzapfel as a teacher, and I'm trying to think of the final one.
Michael Edelstein?
That's right, Michael Edelstein. That was the 7th and 8th grade.
Where does she live now, and what is she doing in her life now?
She works. She lives downtown in Brattleboro. She bought a house downtown, and she works for the Morningside Shelter. And she's going to get married this summer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I guess. What are her near future and long-term plans?
Well, right now she's pretty well focused on the wedding, which is coming up at the end of July, and her husband-to-be is a teacher. He's a 7th grade teacher, and just over in Shelburne Falls, and I think they're just going to, see how everything works out for a while, get settled down. I think they want to buy another house at some point, but that's down the road.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you some questions about your working lives in Marlboro. Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
what work did you have when you settled in Marlboro?
I got a job at Marlboro College, working in what would really be the accounting office, and I stayed there for 8 years, and so I was involved with the billing and budgeting and payroll and pretty much anything that had to do with numbers and money. And then when I left there, I resigned there so that I could spend more time working in our family business, because the business was growing and it was getting to be too much work to do both things. So it was a good move for us. It was just the right time to do it.
For how many years did you perform this job?
Well, so after 8 years at Marlboro College, then that would have been through 1989, and then from then to this year, I've just been working in the business. We're both actually trying to retire. Bob's a little more retired than I am yet, but the business isn't closed down exactly yet, and so I'm still doing the paperwork and accounting for the business.
What were some parts of that job you liked?
Well, the job I had at the college I liked quite well because it was a great place to work. The people were really nice and friendly, and because it was such a small office, the jobs were very varied and you weren't just doing one thing all the time. There was a lot to do, a lot of responsibility, and so I liked that a lot. And at the time they had a daycare center there, so we were very involved with the daycare because there was a lot of volunteer work needed from the parents. So that was very convenient for us, and so I liked that quite well. And when I left and then started just working here in the business, one of the big advantages to that was that it gave me more flexibility with my schedule, so I could take time off when I needed to take care of family affairs, and it was easier to schedule vacations when we got to take them, because then we were both on the same schedule since it was our own business, and so there was a lot more flexibility. That was nice.
Okay, so Mr. Anderson, what work did you have when you settled in Marlboro?
Well, I didn't have anything. I previously worked in computers with the federal government. But we came up here, I really couldn't find much of a job here in that line of work, so I started my own business with excavating with machines.
And for several years you worked as a woodworker and ran a craft shop in town?
I did. That was kind of a part-time thing. I did that with my parent Nancy, and my mother, who she loved crafts and things like that. So we rented the log cabin that's down across from David's place, and we bought. I did some woodwork, and we used to buy crafts to sell, from other not only woodworkers but potters and quilt makers and other people, but basically all handcrafts, and we did that for several years.
What were some of the design influences in the objects you made?
That I made, you mean? Myself, or in general?
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I've always been attracted to modern design, and very much influenced and impressed with the Scandinavian woodworking school, and so a lot of what I did, I made this desk, for example. They're simple and somewhat modern designs that attracted me.
What was the name of your craft store?
Gosh.
The Marlboro Craft Center.
Yeah, Marlboro Craft Center. That's a long time ago. I've forgotten.
With whom did you run the store?
Well, my mother and I primarily. Nancy helped out, and then we had a woman named Jay Herrick who actually spent quite a bit of time working at the store.
And Fran Nevins also.
Did she? I'd forgotten that.
Yes, Fran, for both of them.
What sorts of objects did you have for sale?
Well, it's quite a wide range. I mean, we had some woodwork, coffee tables and smaller items like salt and pepper shakers and things like that made out of wood. We also had quite a bit of pottery, coffee cups, and other household items that would have been made from, made from pottery. I know we had some quilts, tablecloths, a lot of household items that were made.
And jewelry.
And jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun because we enjoyed going around. They have shows. David's very familiar with it as an artist himself, and there were shows that would sell their wares to stores like ours. And so we every now and then we'd go around to these shows and see what people had, and then we'd make a selection of stuff that we would buy to bring back to our store to sell. I enjoyed that a lot.
For how many years did you operate the store?
I can't remember, it was what,
4 years.
4 years, I guess, yeah.
Why did you choose to close it?
Well, I was getting torn in two directions. I had the excavating business going, and that was taking more and more of my time, and I realized I really didn't have enough time for both, so we decided that we'd close the store and I would focus on that. And my mother, actually, her main job was running Hidden Lake, which was a country, kind of like a country inn. So that really, we were running out of time.
Now, I'd like to ask some questions about Anderson Construction.
Yeah, Anderson Excavating was the name. It started out as Anderson Construction, and I changed the name after a couple, 3 years, and it became Anderson Excavating.
Okay, so Mrs. Anderson, in what year did Anderson Excavating begin operation?
1982.
What were some of the considerations which led you to begin a construction company?
Well, I think my husband always liked equipment from a very young age. He was the kind of person that had posters of excavating equipment and tractors and bulldozers on his wall when he was young, instead of rock stars. And it was something that interested him. He had a certain part of him that really liked designing things and figuring things out, how to do things. So he decided that might be something he'd give a try to and see if he could build up a business.
That was one of the, when I was still a youngster, that was one of the reasons I worked on the local farm, because they had a tractor and I liked to drive that tractor. And he'd let me drive it, so that's probably, Nancy's right when she said I was attracted to equipment early on.
What was your role in the company?
I took care of all the bookkeeping and figuring out the taxes, doing the payroll, paying bills.
Mr. Anderson, why did you wish to start well, I guess that's already kind of it. What background, education, or experience did you have in heavy machinery that qualified you for starting a construction design company with heavy equipment?
Not much, I'm afraid, which was a bit of a handicap. I had worked for the town of Marlboro in summers when I was in high school, and I'd learned to drive a road grader and some other equipment then. So, but that was the only experience for the next 20 years. Well, after I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to work for the federal government, and I specialized in computers. So I didn't really have much background for the job that I took on. I went slowly at first and kind of picked it up as I went along.
But you used computers a lot in the business because you need to be able to keep track of everything and send out bills, and you really can't do a business easily without computers these days. So that background in computers really helped, because he could create his own spreadsheets and his own databases, which is a lot easier to do than hiring somebody to do it for you. So that was a real help. And you had some business experience from when you had a part-time business making furniture, so the skills of running a business and making business decisions was there. So you had that going for you. And your sense of design.
So you can answer my questions.
Well, sometimes you forget when you've lived a long number of years, you forget all the things you've done and all the ways that things tie in at some point in your life. You, for instance, as a student, you might study something and think, oh, why am I ever studying this? What am I ever going to do with this? It's not going to help me. But years later, you find yourself in a situation needing certain abilities or skills or knowledge, and that information from way back when actually comes into play. And there's a place for it in your life.
That's what Nancy says is true. I remember I was going to night school in college, and I had to take a science course like geology, and I thought, well, it turned out to be a pretty interesting course, enough so that I took Nancy on the field trips. But the other interesting thing is when I went to work in excavating 20 years later, after I'd taken that course, I found what I'd learned in geology turned out to be quite useful. So it underscores the point that Nancy made. It's something you might learn that you didn't think you needed might turn out to be useful later on in life.
What was the first piece of equipment you purchased?
It was a backhoe. That's what I bought.
Would you describe a few of the types of machinery you've used in your construction business?
Well, I started with a backhoe, and then I bought a small bulldozer, and then I bought a small dump truck and a trailer so I could move the equipment around. And then it kind of expanded from there, and then it got kind of out of hand later on. It's just too much stuff because I liked equipment, so I always had plenty of it around.
What were some of the first jobs you took on?
Well, we did septic systems and house foundations, right? And we cleared land as well for a house site. We took, we use a backhoe back then to get the stumps out of the ground, push them to one side with the bulldozer, and then we dig a foundation, and we put a septic system in, and then do trenching for the well line and that sort of thing.
Ponds. You've done
Yeah,
ponds and
ponds.
stone walls.
Yep.
You designed a couple of houses.
Quite a varied line of work. And it was one of the things I found very interesting about it. You always do different things. Kept it interesting.
Well, and then you did snow plowing in the wintertime.
Yeah, that wasn't so much fun.
As your reputation grew, what other sorts of jobs did you get to do?
Well, we did a lot of, I won't say fancy, but pretty nice landscaping with stone walls and stuff like that. I had a couple of guys who were pretty talented at doing that. And we didn't do the planting, but we'd work with landscapers with them to set up the planting. Some of the houses here in town we did and elsewhere. So, and then we did larger ponds and things like that.
Could you explain the process of bidding on a project?
Well, it's the bidding is where you're asked to provide a price. A homeowner might go out and ask three excavators, what each of us would expect to charge for the work that was needed to be done. What we needed from a homeowner to give it a good and accurate bid was a good detailed description of the work that needed to be done. And so usually we asked for a set of plans, and once we got that, then we'd go through those, and we'd say we had to figure two basic things: all the materials, for example, a septic system, how much pipe we'd need, and how much the tank would cost, and that type of things. And then we also had to figure the labor, that is the time and equipment that we would need to install that. So the way I did it was I just went down, made a list of all the equipment all the parts and pieces that I would need for the system and what it would cost, and then I figured out how long it would take, and for the various pieces of equipment and labor, and I had an hourly rate, and I would then multiply that hourly rate times the number of hours needed, total it up, and that would become my bid. And then the homeowner would see who had the lowest bid, and then he would usually go with that person, and that person would get hired.
What are factors which enable a company to win or lose a bid on a project?
It usually came down to price, unless maybe a bidder was too low, and because he didn't really understand what was needed in there. But most of the people around here are pretty experienced, so that didn't happen. So usually it was a pretty straightforward process.
But sometimes people wouldn't necessarily choose the lowest bidder because your reputation for quality work sometimes was more important than necessarily having the absolute lowest price. And as you were saying, sometimes if the price was too much lower, people would be a little suspicious that the person was either inexperienced or was what they call lowballing and just throwing out a low price, expecting that once they got the job, then they would start saying, oh, well, we have extra expenses that we didn't anticipate, so the job's really going to cost more.
What are some of the projects you've completed which you are most proud of, and why are you proud of them?
Oh, well, we've done a lot of projects, hundreds literally, because I've been in business for 29 years. And we had, in the summertime, 7 or 8 or 9 employees, so we always had a couple of projects going. One house, we actually did a tunnel from the house to the garage, an underground tunnel, about 150 feet or so. So it wouldn't even have to get cold or wet when they went outside to get their garage. And that was kind of fun to do because we'd never done anything like that before. Another customer liked it so well that he wanted to put one in too. I always enjoyed ponds because they were very creative, and a couple of ponds we actually made. They were larger ponds, and we make an island in the middle of the pond, and a diving platform out of rocks stacked up and things like that, with a beach and that sort of thing. So that was a lot of fun.
Will you talk about a few of the high points of your construction career?
Well, it was always fun completing a job and seeing it done. And it's one of the things that I've enjoyed doing is driving. When I drive around the area, I get to look at jobs that I did a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it's fun to see how they, did any problems developed, or how did they look 5 years later or 10 years later. Hard to say high points because I really enjoyed pretty much all of the jobs. When it was finally done, you got a big feeling of accomplishment. No matter what type of job it was done. You felt that it was done right. The customer was happy, and so I got quite a feeling of accomplishment from that.
How many employees did you have during your busiest period?
As I mentioned before, we were in the busiest summers in recent years. We would have, I guess, 8 or 9 plus Nancy and myself. So we'd be 10 or 11 people total.
How far from home have your various jobs been?
Pretty much. We worked in Keene. We've worked in Townsend. I would say probably 30-35 miles.
As the regional economy would rise and fall, how were you able to ride the ups and downs?
Well, I've always felt that this area wasn't as bad as some other areas. In other words, the peaks weren't as high and the valleys weren't as low, so to speak. But, so we were always pretty lucky, and there was always something, enough to do, because there's a varied nature of the work. People might want a pond, or a new owner who bought a house might say, well, I need a garage or something. So we were lucky, and there was always seemed to be enough to do.
What are some of the characteristics that construction business owners should have?
Oh, I think you need to have some tenacity, that is some stick-to-itiveness. I think you need to be honest with people. I think those a couple, and I think probably the rule that I found was most important, because before I'd started in business for myself, I always wondered, what are the secrets of having a business? But what I discovered was that the golden rule was to treat other people just like you'd like to be treated in business. If you took your car and got it repaired, you wanted to be treated fairly and honestly by whoever was repairing it. Well, conversely, that's the way you'd want to treat your customers. That's what I learned.
Has there ever been a period when you felt like finding other work or something else to do with your lives?
Yeah, there were those times. Mostly there were snowy nights in the winter when I got my plow stuck. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't find a shovel. That was probably some of my worst moments. But when the weather was great, I loved it.
How would you say the work changed over the course of your career?
Oh, well, inside, I think computers became, when we started, computers were very basic, and over the years they got better and better, so that was a big help, made the office work easier. Outside, there were advancements in the equipment available. One of the big ones was excavators. They weren't widely available or used here when I started out in the early 80s. And that, but as time went on, in the late 80s, they became more and more available. And that was a pretty slick machine that would solve a lot of problems for an excavator.
What kept you interested in your work?
The variety of the work, today it would be a pond, tomorrow a septic system, next day a foundation, then next day, we had several people who came, a couple of people came and said, well, we're going to put an apple orchard in, but it's what we're told that it's too wet. So we put drainage in to drain the field for them. Another one, we put in underground power for the power company because it had to go through somebody's home and stuff like that. So the variety of the jobs kept me interested.
Would you give a general overview description of your process of completing a project from beginning to end?
Sure. First you wanted to spend some time with the homeowner so that you completely understood the work, particularly if it was a little bit more complex. So you wanted to understand it, and then you wanted to price it out for them, and that meant going through this estimating process, whether it was a bid or just an estimate. You needed to think about what it was going to cost and be pretty accurate about that. And then, if you got the go-ahead from the homeowner to do it, then you would sit down with your crew and discuss the job, usually, and talk about how many, in our case, we had several people on it. You'd pick one or two people that were going to do the work and talk about the job. And I like to bring the guys, then the crew in early on and let them be part of the decision-making process in terms of deciding what equipment they needed for the job and when they would need materials, if materials were needed. And then on the morning of the job, we'd all go out together and take a look at it and get started on it. And I'd be explaining, as we went along to get the boys started. And then at the completion of the job, I would check it. I would always go out every day. I didn't, in the latter years, I didn't always run the equipment very much. I was too busy organizing, the next job, getting set up for that. And so I would check in every day, and when the job was done, check in, make sure the homeowner was happy with whatever had been done. And then you turn the paperwork over to Nancy, and she figures up the bill and mails it out.
Learning how to design and carry out is another part of your work. Is a part of your work. Running a business is another. How did you learn to run a business and promotional parts of your job?
Sorry, I didn't understand the second part of the question.
How did you learn to run the business and promotional parts of your job?
Oh, well, that was a learning process. I started small. The first year was just myself, and then I got one other person to help me later on. So I kept things fairly small and simple and got a chance to work things out. And I'd worked for other people, and when I grew up, my parents ran a small business, so I had some idea of what was going on, and I'd taken accounting courses in college, and so I had some idea of what was going on, and Nancy had some experience, and she would help me in the evenings, because at that point she was working up at the college, but she would help me with taxes and things like that. As far as the promotional part, I didn't have any experience at that. And but I found really the most effective thing, and it took a while to work, but was the word of mouth kind of advertising. If you did a good job for customer A, you might tell another person, oh, I had Anderson over there and they did a nice job here. And then customer B would be, or that neighbor would say, maybe I'll call Anderson because my friend over here was pretty happy with the work. And so that turned out to really be our most effective form of promotion, although we occasionally would put an ad in the paper or something like that. But we didn't do a lot of heavy promoting. I didn't really know how to do it and didn't really feel it was effective for what I was doing.
Who were your typical clients?
I'm sorry?
Who were your typical clients?
Well, they were virtually all homeowners. Occasionally we would do work for small businesses. but mostly they were homeowners, you know, people like your parents, for example, like not particularly your parents, but I mean, you know, like anyone's parents would be people in the area in Marlboro and in the surrounding towns, Brattleboro, Wilmington, Dover, etc.
And you worked with contractors a lot?
I did. That is, carpenters who typically are home home building contractors who might then portion out the part of the work that they weren't going to do. They might be doing the carpentry and the design, but they need a plumber and they need an electrician, they need an excavator, and they would call me. So we did quite a bit of that.
Do you have a business called Mountain Iron Works?
I do, and it's just kind of a sideline. We don't do a lot of it, but we do. We have a nice machine shop set up downstairs, and myself and one of the fellows here have a fair amount of experience in iron work, and we did all the iron work that's in the building. If you took a tour around, you'd see iron stairs and railings and other things like that. So, but it's a quiet business. We don't do a lot of it.
Would you please describe a typical day of work from when you got up until you finished for the day?
Sure. Well, we started at 7, and we'd all meet together at 7 o'clock in the morning, all the crew, and we'd discuss the day. I didn't want to spend too much time there, but we'd spend about 20-25 minutes talking about what jobs we were going to do today and who would run the dump trucks, and when they might be needed on this job or that job. And then they would all disperse. They would take we had a couple of pickup trucks, and they would take the materials that they were going to need. And if the equipment wasn't on the job already, they would take a dump truck and load it up on a trailer and take the equipment to the job and start in. And then I would sit down, I would come into the office, I would be back in the office and would get on the computer and start to maybe work out a bid for a job that was coming up down the road. And then I would do that for a couple of hours and get on the telephone, order supplies. You have to order pipe, you have to order grass seed, various things like that. And after a couple of 3 hours, then I would get in my truck and I would drive out to look at the jobs that we were currently doing to see how they were progressing, see if there were any problems or issues like that. And that might last, depending on how far and how many different jobs we were doing at once. Typically, we would be doing 2 or 3 jobs. Then I might also have an appointment set up to about a future job. Somebody who might have said, well, I want you to come out. I always wanted to look at the job site so that I would understand, have a good picture in my brain of what that job site was like. Was it easy to get to or difficult to get to? Was it wet, dry, etc.? So that whole process might take 2 or 3 or 4 hours. I would come back here kind of mid to late afternoon, and there would be more telephone calls to answer, and I would start to make some notes and things like that about what we had done during the day. And pretty much by then, I was getting sleepy. It was probably maybe 5:30 or so, and time to wind down. The guys usually would come back in around that time, and then we went home.
What do you feel were the more important parts of your work?
Well, everything's important. I mean, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. You've probably heard the expression, or if you haven't, you will. So from that point of view, everything was important, whether it's returning a phone call. I won't say I always was right. There were things I wish I had done better, but somebody calls, you really want to try to return that call promptly, unlike I did with you, for example, because I was out of town. So that's important, but you want to make sure that all your calculations, your figuring is correct. You want to make sure your equipment's in good running order. So it's hard to say what's more important, because, as I say, if it's worth doing it all, then it's worth doing well, and that makes it important.
What were some of the parts of the job you especially liked?
Well, earlier on, I really liked running the machinery. That was pretty interesting and fun, enjoyable. But ultimately, as time went on, I think I liked solving the problems that each job brought its own set of problems, and it would be a team effort. I would talk to the crew and we'd say, well, for example, it might be difficult access to get down to put in a pond, let's say. So how are we gonna get down there? What are we gonna do to do that? So we come up with a solution that way, sometimes jointly, sometimes just me, but I enjoyed that process.
Were there parts of the job you disliked?
That snow plowing at 2 a.m. in the morning, that was the part I disliked.
Are there any other heavy machine contractors in town?
Jim Herrick is one, yeah, sure.
This past winter, you closed Anderson Construction,
Excavating.
excavating, and sold many of your machines.
Yep.
What were some of the reasons why you decided to close?
Well, it was a slowing economy and things were kind of slowing down, but it was primarily the aging issue. I mean, I'm 66, and so I thought, you know, and there's some other things I like to do, and we were busy with Hogback Mountain and doing things with that, and I thought, boy, maybe now's the time to retire, so we just did.
Were there any of the machines you felt you couldn't part with and so kept?
Well, yeah, I hated to part with any of them, but I did part with most of them, but I've kept a couple of pieces.
Why?
Well, I just thought it'd be handy if I have to cut firewood for myself here, and who knows? I probably shouldn't have, but I did.
With your retirement from construction, do you have plans to develop or to redevelop other business interests?
Not at this point. I feel like I'm pretty busy right now, so at this point in time, I don't.
Now I'd like to ask you both a few questions about your work as leaders in the establishment of Hogback Mountain Conservation Area. May I ask you to please give me an overview history of the Hogback Mountain Ski Area?
Well, the White family started it way back in the 40s, and then brought their kids married, brought Dick Hamilton into the business, and a fellow named Brandon Douglas married Betsy White, who then became Betsy Douglas, and they started up the ski area along with the gift shop and the restaurant up there, and that ran up until the mid-80s. They closed it. Well, the gift shop was open, and the restaurant continued to run. The ski area shut down in the mid-80s, and then the gift shop's still open today, and the restaurant shut down, I don't know, sometime in the late 90s, I think. And so that's pretty much the history of Hogback Mountain in terms of all the businesses that are going up there. But the road that goes over it goes way back, which is kind of interesting because they're not, you know, a major road like that going right over the top of a mountain is kind of neat. It isn't that common. So and the road itself is very old. It's called the Molly Stark Trail for a long time because theoretically, I was always told when I was in school that Molly Stark helped drag her husband's, who was General John Stark, dragged his cannons over for the Battle of Bennington. I'm not sure, my history may be a little fuzzy, but that's what I recall. So it's a very old trail itself.
Mr. Anderson, what were your personal connections with the ski area?
Well, I spent every day I could up there skiing in the wintertime. I loved it up there. It was great. And in the summer, when I told you earlier that I had a horse, and once in a while I would ride the horse up there, and that was a lot of fun. We'd camp out at night, stay overnight, and whatnot. I had a friend, Arnold White's nephew. Arnold White had the horse, but his nephew would ride it, so the two of us would go riding around up there, and that was a lot of fun too.
How did you come to the idea of turning the former ski area into a nature conservation area?
Well, I think it was a group idea. I mean, the idea was generated at a large meeting of the town 5 years ago, and I was at that meeting, and people were saying, "Boy, the place is for sale, and certainly it would be nice if we could do something if the town could have that property available." So Nancy and I thought about that afterwards, and we called a variety of people in town who said, sure, we'd like to maybe help out if you want. We'll maybe start a meeting and to see what's possible. And so about a dozen people would gather right in that other room, and we'd sit down and try to figure out how we were going to do this thing and pay for it. And so that's how it got started.
Can you give me an overview of the process you went through to establish the conservation area?
Why don't you take a shot?
Oh, well, I think we realized right off the bat that the person who had the property up for sale was not in a position to give us time to come up with the money to buy it. He was anxious to sell it, and he was either going to sell it or develop it. So we talked to a few people who had worked with the Pinnacle Association, or the Wyndham Hill Pinnacle Association, on how they were acquiring property and conserving it over in Putney. So we sort of got the idea that we would need to come up with a small number of people who would put up the money to buy the property and who were willing to give us time to raise money to pay them back. So and we also talked with the Trust for Public Land and with the Vermont Land Trust, who had a lot more experience with running projects like this too. So they gave us a lot of advice, and so we decided to pursue that model, and we did go around and talk to various people, and were able to find enough people who really wanted that area conserved, didn't want it developed, and really appreciated what was there in terms of the habitat and the animals and the trees, and we just really wanted it saved as it was. So we did that, but then we knew we had to form an association to organize the effort to raise money to pay back this small group of people. So we formed the Hogback Mountain Conservation Association, and there are about 15 people who were on the board of directors, and we just started laying our plans for raising money, and it was a very long process. We probably spent 2 years just negotiating the purchase of the property for that small group of people to get it out of the hands of the seller. So it just one little issue after another until we finally were able to make that happen. And then in the meantime, we were doing fundraising, and we got a lot of help from the Vermont Land Trust, who is our partner and our fiscal sponsor in this process, and got great support from the townspeople and the town, and so, 4 years after we started, we actually were able to close on the property and pay back those original investors and have the land transferred into the town. So now it's a town-owned forest.
What people or experiences would you say have influenced your interest in the conservation?
Well, I think one of the things we've done is and you may have heard of them. We have been having some events up there, primarily this summer. Although we ran a tracking event where we've had local people who came in and talked about things that they knew about. Barbara Cole, for example, George Leoniak, who had a tracking event, and then and other people like that. And that's been really fascinating for me, certainly. And we've got this great fountain of local knowledge. People just your neighbors, for example, who turn out to be very smart about various aspects of what's going on out there. And there's a lot going on up there. It's 600 acres. And there's just all kinds of wildlife up there. It's a great place to hike.
What are some of the parts of the work of establishing the HMCA that you enjoyed?
Well, I think one of the things that struck me was the amazing ability and talent of the people in town that worked with us on this project. You always know people to a certain extent just living in town, but I would say that the depth of their skills and their dedication to the project was just overwhelming to me. Really, the project was a very large project as it turned out, and it required so many different skills. It's just amazing. And somewhere, one way or another, there was somebody in the group that could do whatever was needed, whether it was drawing posters or designing software that we needed to keep track of the project. Web design, marketing skills, grant writing skills, just organizational skills. The list just goes on. And so, just really brought home to me just, what an amazing number of really nice people in town were, and how committed they were as a community to working hard to make good things happen.
Were there parts you disliked or found less than pleasant?
Paperwork's, for me, is can be onerous, but it has to be done, but it's, just filling out forms and things like that, which was part of it. So Nancy did a lot of that, which worked out nicely for me.
And I think we all dreaded actually approaching people and asking them for money for the project. That was a big hurdle for all of us to get over, because it was something we weren't experienced with at all. And we had a little bit of coaching from a professional fundraiser, and then we just ran our own sessions of talking to each other and boosting each other's ego a little and giving ourselves the confidence to approach people, and the anticipation of having to make the phone calls and to ask for interviews with people always loomed large in our minds. But when we went to meet with people, people were so receptive to what we wanted to do, and that I think it was not only a great sigh of relief, but it was really a pleasurable experience in the long run to talk with people about what you foresaw as the benefits of conserving hogback, and learning more about what the people's interest in it was themselves. And so it was sort of a balance, anticipating the worst and then being so happy to find that people liked what you were doing and were willing to make major sacrifices to contribute money to the project.
You are to receive an award soon for your conservation efforts to preserve the Hogback area. Would you talk about the award you are to receive?
Well, this is an award that the Vermont Land Trust grants every year. They choose 3 people who they feel made a major contribution to conservation in Vermont. And we were flattered that they were considering us. I think for myself, I feel as though I'm going to receive that award as a representative of our committee that worked so hard, that they're all equally deserving of this award, because we just could never have done it without them.
Now that HMCA is owned by the town of Marlboro, what role will you each have in the running of the area?
Well, strictly speaking, HMCA isn't owned, the property is owned by the town of Marlboro, but HMCA remains a private organization. And it's at this point it no longer has to fundraise, but there's going to be lots of things to do at Hogback. We'd like to continue to run these events for both for youngsters and for adults, like we've done up there in the past. And we've got a website to maintain, and we've been putting out a newsletter, and we'd like to continue to put out the newsletter so people know what's going on up there. So that's, and we have, there's quite a number of people that will be involved in that, and Nancy and I certainly want to be a part of that.
If you could gaze 50 years into the future, what would you want the conservation area to look like?
just like it does today.
So what people or experiences would you say have influenced you in your personal lives, and in what ways have they influenced you?
For me, I'm speaking just for myself, but I take a little bit. I think it's not any one person that I totally look up to. I look up to a number of people, particularly right here in town, and I take a little bit from each of them, I think, and then try to. I don't want to be like somebody else. I don't want to be my own person, but I admire something that somebody does. For example, David, for example, he's a good public speaker, and he's been an MC for some of our projects, so I listen to that and I admire that, and I think, how does he do that, okay, and can I do something, like that? Well, I can't really, but I, that's what I think about, and there are many other people here in town. It's an unusual town that way, I think, and so that's what I try to do is look at that person and say, boy, that person interesting. What is it about that person that I really like or admire? And I think about that, and sometimes I can't do that thing, but I think about it, and it influences me. That would be my answer.
What about
Well, I think one influence was my godfather when I was younger, and realizing that he expected a lot of people, and he didn't feel that it was enough to just to live and say to grow up as a woman, and this was back in the late 50s, to just grow up and get married and have a family, that there was so much more capability in each person, and that they should try to use all of their talents and to do as much as they could. And I was influenced by my parents, who had a great sense of fairness and a willingness to work hard to achieve goals. That influenced me quite a bit.
and then, Mr. Anderson, what have been some of your interests outside of Anderson Construction and the HMCA? What activities are you involved with now?
Well, I like music. I play the piano a little bit. I like doing that. It's a nice way to relax. And I like the water. So we have a small boat up in Maine right now. We used to be on Lake Champlain. So I try to spend some time on the water. I really like doing that, and have for ever since I was a small boy. I was always trying to be somewhere near the water. How about you?
Well, certainly the boating is a big part of our lives. We've always tried to have a boat, and to be able to get to the water is a great way to relieve tension and to forget about all the work that you didn't quite get finished on a Friday, and just walk away from it and get some time to relax.
Mr. Anderson, is there anything else about your life or work that you'd like to mention, but that I haven't asked you about?
Boy, this has been quite an interview as it is. I think we've covered pretty much everything, and I thank you for your interest.
And what about you, Miss?
I can't think of anything else. You've been pretty thorough.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, that was great. Boy, you had a lot of questions there, man. Put some thought into that.
Pretty well